So I guess kind of the concept of a portal is you kind of have this opening, this gateway that takes you somewhere else. One of the issues with a lot of the libraries, framework, what have you, is you'll have your application in one location, but what if this application wants to affect something else on the page? So you have some legacy code, or you have a different framework being used. How do you have it so this new application you have can update something? You're like, well, when would you really need that? You wouldn't for most cases, but examples of some cases would be if you have a modal or like a sidebar or a nav bar. So say you have some links and then you have like a drop down and you have this new piece of the page that, you know, you need a new drop down and the state of it changes. So I'll show you something really simple that I made that in just a bit, but we'll go over the documentation. For those of you that want to follow along, you don't have to, but here's the QR code. Just realize though, if I'm presenting, so I don't know, does anyone actually snap it? I'll give you like a few seconds. I really just, if I show you the documentation, it can. But, or you can just look at reactjs.org, docs portals. So we'll click on this, and the syntax is pretty easy, actually. As we see here, it provides a first-class way to render children into a DOM node that exists outside the DOM hierarchy of the parent component. That's a very technical way of saying if you want to render something that's somewhere else on the page, you can use portals. And some, interesting enough, in their documentation, they have class components. You actually don't have to use class components, which I thought was kind of interesting that they're not. Because a lot of React, they move more towards, towards functional components, but it still works. But when I was learning this, I was like, do I have to use a class component still for this? That's a little bit of a downside, but then they're like, no. So, so why is that? Let's see. So we have the create portal. You're going to have basically the JSX, which is going to be child, and then you're going to have the container, which is going to be the DOM node. And it's really that simple. So you can go down to some of the examples here. And you'll see the churn, the modal. Here we go.
Okay,
That's not large enough.
yeah, could you zoom in a bit? That'd be fantastic.
There we go.
My fault. Thank you.
Yeah. So you have this React DOM create portal, and then props. And you don't actually have to pass the props. This is just the way they're doing it. You can have any JSX and then any element there. So now, sorry, I don't know why this VPN thing is so funny. Second. Sorry, I just wanted to get rid of that little VPN thing that was. Mac is doing funny things, so apologize. All right, so now I'm going to go to the coding demo because I got to share it. Yeah, sorry. Oh, you're right. That Sharon? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, let's dive into some code. Now, granted, I have terrible stage fright with coding on the spot. Anyone looks over my shoulder and then I just forget how to type. So I decided to do this beforehand, so it may have been somewhat of a cheat, but also, I mean, bore you with me trying to stumble through bugs that I'll probably create.
Just think of it as pair programming.
Say what?
Just think of it as very extreme pair.
Oh, mob programming. Literally, you're being jumped by the mob. Yeah. So I have a QR code here too. If anyone's interested, you can also. I don't know. Well, the GIF did, but the other piece might be a little bit hard to remember. So I'll give you 20 seconds to do that if you want.
And we'll make sure to post all these links in the Utah JS Slack channel, or in the Meetup channel under the Slack group. So look there as well after this.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll have this as well. So I also have this on GitHub, but I imported GitHub to Code Sandbox. Code Sandbox is pretty awesome. So here we have a. Let's see how big is that. Let's make it a little bit bigger. So the idea is have a button, click, opens up a sidebar. Button here changes to click to close the nav bar. You can also close the nav bar with this X. So say the UX person's like, hey, I want to be able to close it here, and I also want to be able to close the sidebar here. That's what I have. So click, changes the button, and then it goes to close. Nothing really crazy. I wanted to make a super simple application so that it wouldn't get all sorts of, it wouldn't get stuck in the weeds of what's happening with the use case at the very least. The rest of the code, I did this on purpose, but it is definitely an overly engineered example, but it's to show how you can use Portal. So we go to index.html and you guys can see that, correct? Okay. I have some styling, using some Bootstrap, and then I have this sidebar piece page, and then I have a main piece, and then as we see here, I guess I could have had ID equals app or whatnot, but I'm just grabbing the main element and rendering my React component. But the sidebar piece is not part of that component in the DOM per se. So the question, and this is why I used it, is like, okay, well, what if I have something in the main application, but I actually want to use this sidebar that's already been built? And this is actually a use case that I ran into at my current job at Ancestry. Granted, we didn't use React Portal, but knowing it now, I'm like, oh, maybe we could have used that instead. So how to use it? Well, the sidebar, basics of it is you use this React DOM dot create portal, and then you have the JSX piece, and then you have the element that you want to mount, and then the element you want to mount is sidebar. And what's really cool is even though sidebar is outside of the application, I can open and close it, and state, because this is opening and closing based on the state. It's existing. Yeah. Guess just dive a little more into it. Why would you want to do it this way? Also, say you have a really complicated React component, kind of like how I've over-engineered this. I'm using context, which has the state, and then any of the state mutators, basically any functions that will change the state. I can use it in this React DOM portal piece as well as in the app body. So we have the close button, open button, and it's all syncing together. So that, I mean, I guess I could go a little more into kind of how I've over engineered it, but that's not really the point of this. Have the code sandbox, so you guys can look at it. I'm using context for state management. But once again, this isn't about React context or anything. But like I said, overly engineered. And I was trying to throw in all the stuff that I knew. Okay, it's like, okay, how crazy could this get to make sure that it wouldn't break using Portal and it still works. So, yeah.
I got a question. So what would be some of the other use cases you might think of with Portal? 'Cause I see it more, not more of, but in addition to this, it's like pop-ups.
Modals, yeah, modals are kind of the main one. I wanted to be a little bit different and just not have
No,
like,
okay.
Copy paste someone else. I mean, I guess I could have the modal.
We wouldn't have. We wouldn't have.
Yeah. Also, I wanted to actually learn it, so I figured if I actually coded it up, then I'd actually know what's going on. Than just, hey, here's some code. Look at it. Ta-da. But yeah, that nav bars too, I imagine. So say you had a nav bar, but it changes or doesn't open a certain state, or doesn't highlight, or is unhighlighted. If you're in a certain state, you might want that to be updated. So that's where Portal used. Yes.
So if you're going to be integrating this like into some legacy application or something, and let's say that there's not an element, but you know where it needs to go, you should be able to use like CSS selectors to find an appropriate element, insert a div, and then use the portal to inject.
Yeah, you can use vanilla JavaScript to inject the div in or find somewhere that you want. The way that I'm doing here is it already exists, this side, just because I didn't want to get too convoluted, even though I kind of over-engineered it React-wise. And granted, I don't know I guess some takeaways though would be performance. I don't know if you integrate it and you're using another framework, what the life cycle would be. So if something's dynamically added, say you're using Angular or Vue, and something appears and disappears, you might have to worry about that when it comes to React.
I think I've also seen it used as, instead of selecting an element, you can create an element after, like whether it's the body or not the body, like the main, so whether it's above it. So you could potentially create the aside element.
Yeah,
as
yeah,
the
that's
container.
another. Yeah, I could have generated inside of the sidebar piece of this side. I was just thinking, I guess I did get as far in. If you already haven't, in the use case that I ran into, something similar problem is we already had a sidebar pop in, pop out that already exists, and when you click on it, it opens, but it's empty. We needed to inject some stuff, but via React. Part of the application is elsewhere. So.
Yeah, it's really useful because React is very much component tree, data flows down to the children. And so if you've got parent component, branches, two different children, which both have their own children and both have their own, and then later you come across, you know what, this code could be really nice to share over here. Well, with like state and data, they're like, well, let's use context or Redux or something, and let's share data. But if you want to go one step further and be like, well, I've actually got like semantic markup or HTML and all that stuff, how do I share that component? You could use a portal and just say, hey, there's this element here, select it, inject it, or create an element, add it to this part of the app, and then inject it. So it's really sky's the limit on, I want code to be able to pop up somewhere outside of its normal tree of how it would render, which is kind of cool. So it'd be a lot of use cases.
So I think with that use case, my question would be like, why not just move it into like a shared components folder and then render it into different places? I'm sure there's a reason.
Yeah, one reason is if you're not using a greenfield and say you already have an application that's, for example, with the use case that we're using, we haven't migrated everything to React yet. We're using Node templates to serve up a lot of the pieces. Or if somebody's using actual vanilla web components themselves, so they wrap it up and throw it in, but it's not actually React, but you want to affect it somewhere. So yeah, it kind of gets to that. Like I said, this is one of those kind of edge cases that once the application gets really large, I've run into, but it's not very often because usually you'll have kind of the spa and everything being React. But the things are legacy, which in the JavaScript world, something's legacy after like a year. So, and I guess this is kind of maybe a pseudo Band-Aid, maybe more like a brace, I would say, to use. A little more involved than just a Band-Aid, but it's actually a little more supportive too. But I wouldn't just go in and just start using portals everywhere. One thing I noticed too with, if I can, it might be difficult to do with the code sandbox because of the size, but if you go into the React dev tools, wherever that component's supposed to be at, it comes back as null when it's using a portal. Just realize that too. It's like, oh, like the component exists, but what's the markup? Oh, it's null. So that can, I mean, debugging it's probably not too difficult, but just realizing can kind of get a little weird too. So anyway, yeah, I'll have this link up, and like I said, I also have it on my GitHub. It's just learn React portals. And that's thank you for listening, and yeah.